A question I get quite a bit, guys, because I kind of alluded to in some of my previous videos on the YouTube channel, I've alluded to this idea that I'm a big DC fan, and, you know, obviously there's a ton of Marvel fans out there. There's a lot of DC fans out there as well. So I thought I would answer the question from my personal opinion as to where we stand at this very point in time, guys, here in 2020. The Marvel versus DC, fan wars, essentially. The wars between these two, which one's better, so on and so forth. I thought that I would break it all down for you guys here in this segment of the show. So, the question I got was, what's better and why, Marvel or DC? And so, here's what I'm going to say about it. DC, even from the standpoint, whether we're talking movies, comics, video games, whatever it is that you want to, however you want to look at it, DC is more of the mature audience, in my personal opinion, guys. It's a darker story. It's a more gritty story than that of the Marvel, comics, movies, games. It is just more, it's a darker ordeal, right? It's a darker universe, in my opinion. So more of like a mature audience, even though a lot of these are many people can play them, right? Marvel, on the other hand, is more of a kid-friendly type of universe. Whether you're talking from the movie perspectives, from the video games to even the comic books, it's just kind of a more feel-good, even though there are certainly intense moments to it. So those are the comparisons, right? Like one is Gears of War and one is Fortnite kind of thing in the video game world, right? You've got a dark, gritty story like Gears of War that's like kind of like DC. And then you got Fortnite, which is kind of for everybody, and that's more so, Marvel. So what does that mean? Well, in my opinion, I look at the comics, and I don't even think it's close. I think DC has, the comics are absolutely incredible. The characters are just so memorable, and you really can, it feels like a lot more connections with those characters, like Batman, for example. Versus that of Marvel, I don't think the comics are as good. Now we get to the movies, and the movies are a big topic conversation. And I gotta say, guys, Marvel is winning the cinematic wars, and it's not even close at this point in time, in my personal opinion. Now, why do I say that? Well, because Marvel has done an incredible job, and whether you're a huge DC fan, a huge Marvel fan, you know this, and I know this, that Marvel has done a great job of building their universe from an inception of Iron Man to Avengers and War, and even beyond that in the future phases that they have and what they're planning. Who knows what it's going to look like down the road? But right here, right now, what they built is something unlike anything we've ever seen in cinematic history as it is. The way that they have kind of concluded one phase and then they kind of move on to the next one, it's unbelievable. They have done an incredible job over at Marvel, creating an incredible narrative. Endgame, in my opinion, became the best superhero movie ever made, in my opinion. It actually overtook The Dark Knight for me. Endgame was incredible. And so with that, I, want to kind of stress that what I believe happened here, though, with DC, and I've said this before, the DC Cinematic Universe had a head start, in my personal opinion. I thought that they were actually going to be way above and beyond what Marvel was doing. The problem was that they didn't continue what they started, what was built for them with Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. The Dark Knight trilogy, from Batman Begins to The Dark Knight to The Dark Knight Rises, those three games were setting up the future of the DC Cinematic Universe. They did not continue it, though. And for whatever reason, they just didn't. And I think that will go down in history as one of the reasons why Marvel really overtook DC from a cinematic perspective. So what am I getting at here, guys, is that right now, Marvel is definitely winning the cinematic war. I believe that DC is going to maybe start getting it back, maybe with the Batman, the next Suicide Squad, all these other, movies that are going to be coming out. But Marvel is still above and beyond what DC has even attempted to do. And I think that they definitely could have had something if they would have picked up right where The Dark Knight Rises left off, and then, continue kind of built off of those, kind of like what Marvel did with Iron Man. They built off of Iron Man. And so I just think that DC was a huge missed opportunity. Marvel ran with it, and then there you have it. As far as the video games are concerned, this is a little bit closer in my opinion. I actually have DC ahead here, even though there's not like a huge sample size of like DC games and Marvel games. I've got to say, up to this point, DC has done a pretty good job when we talk about like the Batman Arkham series, and you could even go into like the Lego games and just all the different ways in which that you can connect with it. Marvel is definitely gaining, though, with the Avengers coming out, even though it's had a very much so mixed reaction to it. But even Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man coming out, these are pretty good titles. And so are they starting to compete? Absolutely. I think that the playing field is getting closer and closer to being even. Marvel is definitely winning the cinematic war, and DC is definitely winning the comic book war. So, all in all, who you got? Well, guys, I'm a DC fan. I love DC. I just like the characters more, in my opinion, even though I've loved Marvel characters now throughout the course of the cinematic universe. Absolutely, I'm starting to really fall in love with these characters. But, grew up with the comics around the DC, characters and such. And so I just have more of a connection there. Everybody's different. Everyone's going to have their opinions. But I would say that Marvel, up to this point, has done a better job than DC. And that's coming from a big DC fan. They've just done a better job overall. From the video games to the movies to even, you could even say the comic books. They're just doing a better job all the way around. DC is trying to figure out. I think they're starting to realize what they did right, wrong, and what they can do different moving forward. So we'll see what happens. History's going to tell us, guys. And, the future is going to tell us, what happens here. DC has a number of opportunities. Even though their movies aren't like as popular, they're still selling millions of tickets, guys, for these movies. And I mean, I gotta say that even though most of the movies that DC's been coming out with lately have not been very good, it is what it is. I mean, they're still selling very good. And they have a chance to, really continue their universe. Because I think people are cheering for DC to do well. Even Marvel people are cheering for DC to do well. Because if DC does well, that means that the comic book and superhero, realm of movies and games and comics continues to thrive and flourish. And so I think DC fans should want Marvel to do well. Marvel should want DC to do well. It's just back and forth, even though it's a war, technically speaking, kind of like Star Wars versus Star Trek or Call of Duty versus Battlefield or, all these different ways in which that the fans kind of create these narratives, the console wars between Xbox and PlayStation. At the end of the day, if both consoles or both titles or, both universes do well, it's helping the entire space as a whole. So we should be cheering for each other, building each other up. We should also be really, kind of voicing our opinions about it and trying to voice what we believe needs to happen into existence, trying to get DC to kind of move in a positive direction. The same thing with Marvel, how they can continue moving forward. It's an incredible thing, guys, that the superhero world from Marvel and what they've done to then, of course, video games and comics and what DC's working on doing and such. It's incredible how big this thing's gotten. I never really saw comic book heroes getting this big. And it's unbelievable how huge it is at this point. It's an amazing thing, and I can't wait to see what happens in the future. But let me know, guys, are you a Marvel or a DC fan? What do you guys think? This is one man's opinions. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And for more content like this, guys, stay here with Zero TV.